Good morning, Ohio. James Lewis of This Dream House, a show that's all about the house. Joining us today is Danny Tarkanian. He is the author of Rebel with a Cause, the true story of Jerry Tarkanian. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So why was he called the Shark?
That was a nickname that a Long Beach Press Telegram reporter made for him, and it was actually a complimentary name. A lot of people have taken it the other way, but my dad really enjoyed it and embraced it.
So why was your father's coaching career so controversial?
Well, because he had the courage to stand up and fight the NCAA and their unjust rules and enforcement policies. And I mentioned in the book, and it was one of the main reasons why I wrote the book. You know, a lot of people, when my father was coaching, they would say, oh, he just complained about the NCAA because he was caught violating rules. But as I listed in the book, none of the rules he violated were given large sums of money, cars, cash, or anything like that by he, his coaches, or the boosters. They were all small violations that dealt with allowing kids to be able to go to college like their fellow students. The NCAA's enforcement program started in the 1950s, and the rules that were passed applied to the kids that were playing at that time, kids from affluent families with discretionary income. From the 1960s on, the poor inner-city African-American kids started dominating basketball and football, and the rules just could not apply to them because they would, one, they could never get out to school, and two, they would be living in poverty once they got to college. And I'll put some examples of that is we recruited a kid named Richie Adams, who I played with at UNLV from Fort Apache in the Bronx in New York. Richie lived with his grandmother. He had no parents. He was in a high-rise project in one of the worst areas in the entire country. How does he get to college at UNLV? It's against the NCAA rules to pay for his airline ticket. Well, of course, someone's got to pay for it. His grandmother doesn't have any money. She could barely afford to pay for the tenant that she was living at. So somebody does that. Then he gets out to college. The kid doesn't have money for anything outside of cafeteria food or the dormitory. He doesn't have money to go out on a date. He doesn't have money to buy new clothes. He doesn't have money to pay for his laundry. The NCAA eliminated that. They don't have money for school supplies. The NCAA eliminated that. Every school in the country recruited those kids who were breaking those NCAA rules. And my father spoke out against them. And the NCAA felt, here's this young upstart coach from a small school like Long Beach State trying to tell us how to run our business. So they came after him and put him on probation for these type of violations. And my father fought back on him. He took him all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, 12 years of a lawsuit. They had 2 congressional investigations and 4 infractions committee hearings, and they ended up having to pay him $2.5 million in a civil case. Obviously, that infuriated the NCAA, and they kept coming after him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that is ridiculous that they won't even let you pay for the travel for the student to get to the university.
Absolutely not. And that was most of the violations my father had at Long Beach State and UNLV. You cannot pay for it. And, every school in the country is doing this. What they do is they'll go out and they'll find somebody who the player's close with, a coach or somebody, and they'll get the coach the money, and the coach will buy the airline ticket and say that he's the one who paid for it. But it's instead of just passing common sense rules that everybody can follow, the NCAA has these rules that they allow them to go after the schools that they want to go after and ignore the ones that don't.
Exactly. It sounds like it's very elitist. It sounds like it's very very at their discretion.
Well, when the NCAA first started, they had an executive director named Walter Byers, and I think he was there for about 40 years. He thought of himself a lot like Edgar Hoover. He was in control of the most powerful amateur organization in the entire country. He had autonomy. Nobody could touch him, and he didn't like to be challenged. So you challenge a guy like that, and boy, they come after you. My father witnessed that firsthand.
Does this book put to rest some of the lies and the misconceptions that are about your father's career?
Yeah, what I did was I laid out all the documentation, the factual stuff from his lawsuits with the NCAA, from his congressional hearings, things that the infractions committee cases, so that they'll see factual evidence as opposed to personal opinions, and it certainly does. Anybody who looks closely at it, they will understand this is how it works. Now, they may say, oh, well, Tark's hiding something. This is his son who wrote the book. He's hiding something. But I laid out everything, every violation and what they were and how ridiculous they were. It was a violation. We used to have kids, if they didn't go to school, weren't in class, so academic advisor would find them at their apartments and drive them over to their class from their apartments, and the NCAA ruled that was providing free transportation to student athletes. And that's what they do. They make it sound like it's a horrible violation, and it's not much. This book has a lot of that, but what I wanted to focus more on the book, for what I think the readers will enjoy, is just the relationship. First of all, how my father first started his relationship with the players that he was coaching, and how he motivated them, because it was completely different from the way coaches were doing it when he first started in the 1960s.
Speaking of the 1960s and how he changed things dramatically, what was his role in breaking down the color barrier?
Well, there were a few coaches, and a couple of them before him, Don Haskins from Texas El Paso, or Texas Western, I think they were called at the time, that recruited a lot of the inner city kids. My father was the first, I believe, that recruited inner city kids that had problems off the court and problems in the classroom. And my father did that because he grew up as these kids. He was an Armenian immigrant and living in the Central Valley, California, so he experienced a lot of discrimination. He had no money growing up. He was a horrible student. In fact, he said if he hadn't met my mother, it would have took him 10 years to graduate college. And he was got in trouble off the court. So when he started coaching, he decided he was going to have a close relationship with his players. This was something contrary to virtually every other coach in the country at the time, who were more dictators and bosses as opposed to a father figure. So my dad recruited players that had the problems that he had, that he understood, and he knew how to relate with them and get them to trust him, to be loyal to him, and he was loyal back. And then he got them to play harder than any other program in the country. And that was the key to his success.
One of the other keys, I would say, would be his willingness to work with the junior college players and his experience in junior college. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would include that in the kids that have problems in the classroom. Most of those kids in junior college weren't able to qualify at a four-year school, so they went to junior college. But my father made an absolute career out of junior college transfers. He took over a Long Beach State program that was Division II, and in his third year with almost all junior college players, they lose to UCLA by 2 in the Western Regional Finals during UCLA's 7-year NCAA tournament run. He did it with all players that nobody else would touch.
So is that why John Wooden refused to schedule him in a regular season game?
John Wooden at least was honest about it. He said, and I got the quotes in the book, my mother kept a scrapbook of every season my father played, of all the articles with great stuff in it. And one of them was John Wooden's statement saying he doesn't want to play Long Beach State. They're too physical and too tough to play in the regular season. The USC coach, Bob Boyd at the time, he made some excuses about Tarkanian being a cheater and involved with the fights against the NCAA. I really respected John Wooden. I know my dad did too, and John Wooden really respected my father.
Wow. Why had UNLV been considered tumbleweed tech?
Well, when it got there, the school was very new. I don't know exactly how many years. The basketball program had only been around for about 5 or 6 years. The city was only 350,000 people. Now there's over 3 million. And it was all a commuter school. Very few people stayed on campus. Students stayed on campus. So it was really a brand new school. And in my father's 4th year at UNLV, he took them to the Final Four, created a lot of attention and notoriety, and the way they played, the style of ball was a big part of it too. They averaged 110 points per game without a shot clock at the three-point line, so people enjoyed watching the team play. It was the most entertaining brand of basketball in the entertainment capital of the world.
So what role did he play in them being called the Running Rebels?
Well, my father, when he first started coaching, was a 1-2-2 zone defensive coach. In fact, when they almost beat UCLA, that's what they ran. And John Wooden said he was the best zone coach he'd ever coached against. Then when he went to UNLV, he lost his center in August, just before the season started. And he didn't have any big kids. He had all these really fast athletes. And the best thing about my father was he had no ego, and he always felt he could learn more from other coaches. And so what he did was he called Norm Ellenberger, who he felt was the best pressure defensive coach in the country at the time at New Mexico. Took his whole coaching staff down there, learned what Norm taught, added a few other things, and started a full court pressure man team. And then he also was one of the first coaches to give the players a green light to shoot right away. He used to pass the ball around and try to get the first open shot. My father felt if we play great pressure defense, creative turnovers, we can get a bunch of quick, easy shots. And again, as I mentioned, imagine in today's basketball, a team averaging 110 points a game. Well, they did this without the three-point line or the shot clock. It was really astounding what happened.
Wow, that is phenomenal. I mean, because like you said, there were a lot of teams that would just hold the ball or stall. and they were going at him and being aggressive even back then. That is remarkable. So they were.
They lost. They lost to North Carolina in the Final Four by 1 point, and North Carolina did Dean Smith's famed four corners offense where they wouldn't shoot the ball unless they had a layup for 16 minutes in the second half. And UNLV continued to press from all the way throughout the game, created some turnovers from it, but also baskets, and ended up losing by one. But I think if you ask any fan, they'd much rather watch the solid ball UNLV was playing than what North Carolina did.
Do you feel your father is remembered more for his NCAA title or his years of consistency?
Year of consistency, you said?
Years of consistency.
Yeah, everybody I talk to now, or the vast majority of them, all talk about that national championship team, and then the team after that was even better. It's unfortunate because he had great teams, as I mentioned. He had great teams at Long Beach. There were three teams in the top five in his 5 years there. He had that great 77 team, and actually the year before they were a great team also at UNLV. Their 87 team at UNLV was 37-1 before they lost to Indiana in the Final Four. So he had some great consistency. But he's remembered more for those in that national championship team, probably because a lot of us are getting too old, and the new kids out there don't remember what happened back in the 80s and 70s.
So why were they banned from the 1991 NCAA tournament?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mentioned how my father went up to the U.S. Supreme Court fighting the NCAA. Well, after the 1977 Final Four, the NCAA put UNLV on probation, and for the first time ever ordered a coach fired as a coach. And my father fought them all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA's enforcement policies were violated, were not fair, and that he was not given a fair hearing, nor was there substantial evidence to prove it. But the Supreme Court also ruled that the NCAA was a voluntary organization, sort of like the Elks Club, the Boy Scouts. If you didn't like it, you can drop out and join another program. Well, anybody who understands college sports knows that's not true. The NCAA has a monopoly on college sports. So what the Supreme Court ruling said was, well, you can't fire Tarkanian UNLV because you're a state institution. The NCAA can penalize you for not doing so. So the NCAA was penalized UNLV and kept them out of the 1992 NCAA tournament because UNLV was forced by the U.S. Supreme Court decision not to fire Tarkanian. And it was a real mess. I laid it out in the book as well as I could explain it. It's something I think is really important for people to understand how the NCAA operates.
Was the connection between Richard Perry over-exaggerated?
Well, sure it was. Richard Perry was, first of all, he changed his name when he was convicted of point shaving, and a lot of people didn't know who he was, and he also moved from New York to Las Vegas at the time. But Richard Perry was an AAU coach in New York City for a number of years. He was very close with a lot of players from St. John's, from other schools in the New York City area, and he got to be very close with our player from New York City named Moses Scurry. And when he moved to Las Vegas, he reacquainted with Moses. And all he did was he had him over his house, and they were in a hot tub, and that picture just blew the lid off of the program here. But if you look at it, Moses Scurry and David Butler, who were in that picture, both had already graduated and did not play in the game that UNLV lost to Duke in the Final Four. They were on the team that destroyed Duke, so there's no doubt they weren't point shaving. And the other kid in the picture was Anderson Hunt, who was the MVP of the national championship team and the leading scorer in the year we lost to Duke. None of them had any appearances of doing anything wrong, but because of the way our society is, perception being so much, at a school like UNLV that was looking to force my father out used that as a tool to do so. And I mentioned that in the book, and you wonder, why would the UNLV want to force Tarkanian out after all the great success? And it's really an interesting part of the book. When my father first went to UNLV, they were considered, UNLV's image was Sin City, prostitution, mob. My father's image was tainted because of his battles with the NCAA. But as the city grew and became more family-oriented and wanted to change their image, they felt my father's image of fighting the NCAA was hurting the community, hurting the casinos, hurting the bottom-line profit, and they wanted to get rid of him so that it wouldn't continue. And they used that hot tub picture as a means to do so.
Did he ever regret not taking the Lakers job?
All the time. He had the job the year before Magic Johnson came, and he felt with Magic they could win the national championship. many times we'd be watching the NBA playoffs between Boston and the Lakers, and my dad would say, "Isn't that big time? Isn't that big time?" He loved that and regretted it. I went through the book of why he turned it down. One of his close friends, who was his agent at the time, was murdered the night he was supposed to come over and meet with my mom and father and give him the contract to sign with the Lakers. And my father was just too disheartened, decided not to go.
So how excited was he about going home to his alma mater to coach?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, very exciting for him because he was forced out of UNLV at a very young age. He was 60 years old. He had a lot more coaching that he wanted to do. And the Fresno community is unbelievable, and by far the greatest people I've ever been associated with. My father in when most other schools wouldn't touch him because of his battles with the NC2A, and they embraced him. We didn't have the kind of success at Fresno that we had at UNLV in Long Beach, much of which was because of my dad's continual battles with the NC2A. But the Fresno community supported him all the way to the end, did everything they could to make it feel great, and they do to this day. I mean, I went back and did a book signing at Fresno State, and the support my father had with the fans there is just unbelievable. A lot of it has to do with his Armenian community there and my father's Armenian heritage.
So tell us about the Tarkanian Basketball Academy.
Well, when my father finished coaching, UNLV was doing their best part to eliminate my father's memory from that community. And I felt that one of the most important things in life are the life lessons you learn through playing sports, whether it's basketball, some other sports. You learn competition, you learn how to handle adversity, you learn how to take directions from a supervisor. Winning the class loses dignity, as my father said. So I started a basketball academy to keep my father's name out there and help the young kids in Southern Nevada.
So is that where the Los Angeles Knicks got started?
Yes, it is. The Las Vegas Knicks. Yep.
Where is the best place to buy your book?
You can go to Amazon because it's real simple. You just punch in Rebel with the Cause of my name, Danny Tarkanian, and the book will come up and they'll deliver it to you within 2 days. We have it in a few of the bookstores, but being that it's self-published is not in as many as it would be if I had a publisher.
Where on social media, where on the web is the best place to follow you at and to learn more about the book?
Well, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook, and it's just my first and last name on both Twitter at Danny Tarkanian and on Facebook the same. We post different things about the book. I'm trying to let the readers know that these are the type of stories you're going to read, and I think how entertaining they'll find the book. More so than the battles with the NC2A, which was important to me, was the funny stories that my father told about recruiting, how he dealt with players, and they can see that on social media.
That is awesome. Thank you, Danny, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate learning more about your book, Rebel with a Cause, the story of Jerry Tarkanian.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I really enjoyed it.